The Agincourt Anomaly, How Mud and Wood Broke Steel. Part 1. The Tactical Impossibility. October 25th, 1415. The Fields of Northern France. In the annals of military history, there are battles won by superior strategy, battles won by technological advancement, and battles won by sheer, overwhelming numbers. And then there is the Battle of Agincourt, an anomaly that defies conventional military logic. On this single day, one of the most heavily armored, well-rested, and numerically superior armies in Europe was utterly annihilated by a starving, diseased force a fraction of its size. This was not just a defeat. It was the systemic slaughter of the French nobility. To understand how a peasant weapon made of simple yew wood shattered the age of the heavily armored knight, we must examine the exact numbers, the brutal terrain, and a fatal tactical miscalculation. Welcome to the anatomical breakdown of the Battle of Agincourt. Part 2. The numbers and the contrast. Let us look at the opposing forces. King Henry V of England was leading a deeply compromised army. After a grueling siege at Harfleur and a forced march across France, disease, specifically dysentery, had ravaged his men. The English force stood at a mere 6,000 to 7,000 men. Crucially, look at their composition. Only about 1,000 of these were men-at-arms heavily armored infantry. The remaining 5,000 to 6,000 were lightly armored longbowmen. They were commoners, lacking steel plate, freezing in the October rain. Opposing them was the vanguard of the French Royal Army. Modern historical consensus places the French numbers between 20,000 and 25,000 men. The numerical ratio was staggering, roughly one English soldier for every 4 Frenchmen. But it wasn't just about total numbers. It was about the quality of the troops. The French force included up to 10,000 elite men-at-arms and knights in the finest Milanese plate armor. They had overwhelming superiority in heavy cavalry. They even possessed crossbowmen and early artillery. However, confident in their noble heavy cavalry, the French commanders pushed their ranged units to the back of their formation, rendering them utterly useless. Part 3. The Battlefield Anatomy. The fatal funnel numbers alone do not dictate the outcome of war. Geography does. The French managed to block the English retreat at a specific piece of terrain between the woods of Agincourt and Tramecourt. This was a fatal geographic funnel. At the English position, the gap between the two forests was roughly 1,200 yards wide. But where the battle would actually be fought, the field narrowed to just 900 yards. Furthermore, the field had recently been plowed for winter wheat, and it had rained violently the night before. The ground was not just wet. It was a thick, clay-like swamp, described by chroniclers as being deep enough to swallow a man's boots. A fully armored French knight, combined with his armor and weapons, carried between 50 to 60 pounds of extra steel. A mounted knight on a barded warhorse weighed well over 1,500 pounds. The French were about to force the heaviest army in the world into the deepest mud in France, through a funnel that would compress their massive numbers into a fatal crush. Part 4. The mathematics of the longbow Henry V recognized his only advantage, the English longbow. From an engineering standpoint, the longbow was a masterpiece of kinetic energy, made from a single piece of yew. It had a draw weight of roughly 100 to 150 pounds. Let's do the lethal math. A highly trained English archer could fire 10 to 12 arrows per minute. With roughly 5,000 archers on the field, the English could unleash a staggering 50,000 arrows every 60 seconds. These were not standard arrows. They were tipped with bodkins, narrow, hardened steel points designed specifically to punch through chainmail and exploit the gaps in plate armor. To protect his unarmored archers from the French cavalry charge, Henry ordered his men to hammer thousands of 6-foot sharpened wooden stakes into the mud, angled outward. The killing zone was prepped. Part 5. The Crush and the Massacre. At roughly 11 a.m., the French lost their discipline and launched their first cavalry charge. It was an immediate disaster. The heavy war horses sank deep into the clay. The charge slowed to a helpless crawl. Then Henry gave the order. The sky turned black. A continuous, deafening hail of arrows slammed into the French lines. While the plate armor protected the knights' bodies, the horses were vulnerable. Maddened by pain, horses bucked their riders into the mud and trampled their own infantry, advancing from behind. Then came the French main infantry advance. 8,000 heavily armored men marching directly into the narrowing funnel of the battlefield. To avoid the arrow storm coming from the flanks, the French soldiers unconsciously moved toward the center. This created a deadly phenomenon known in modern crowd control as a crowd crush. The French were packed so tightly together that they couldn't lift their weapons. Men who fell into the mud could not get back up. They were trampled. Hundreds of French nobles did not die by the arrow or the sword. They suffocated, face down in the freezing mud, crushed by the weight of their own comrades. When the English archers ran out of arrows, they didn't retreat. Dropping their bows, they picked up mallets, axes, and daggers. Being lightly armored, they could move freely over the mud. They leaped over their wooden stakes and fell upon the exhausted, trapped French knights. It was no longer a battle. It was an execution line. Part 6. Casualties and Legacy. The statistics of the aftermath are chilling. The English lost incredibly few men. Estimates range from 112 to roughly 600 casualties. The French losses were catastrophic. Up to 6,000 Frenchmen lay dead. Among them were 3 dukes, at least 8 counts, a viscount, an archbishop, and thousands of knights. The ruling class of an entire generation of France was wiped out in 3 hours of muddy slaughter. Agincourt remains a profound case study in military history. It proves that superior numbers and heavy armor can become a lethal disadvantage when countered by hostile terrain, weather, and disciplined ranged firepower. The longbow had outclassed the knight, forever changing the doctrine of European warfare. If you found this tactical breakdown of Agincourt informative, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. What other historical anomalies would you like us to analyze next? Let us know in the comments. Until next time.